Hey everyone, my name is Shana Mohan, and today on my channel we're going to be doing something a little bit new. I saw another YouTuber named Bailey Sarian do it. She was talking about like murder mysteries while doing her makeup, so I thought I would do that with this look right here. So today we're going to be talking about the killer clown, and yes, he's just as bad as he seems. If you want to know what happens and what he does that gives him this notorious name, please keep watching. Okay, so I already primed and set my eyes with the Rare Beauty eye primer. So we're gonna do a simple look, but it's gonna have a pop of color. All the products will be linked in the description box below and also on my makeup Instagram, which is at Shana's Touch. Guys, this story that I have for you, let's just get into it. Back in the 40s, 1942 to be exact, there was a guy named John Wayne Gacy. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce his last name, or Gacy. And he performed at children's hospitals, and he disguised under the names Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown. And if you see me looking here, I just like wrote down all of like the notes for the story just so I don't miss anything. And I also make sure I don't say anything incorrectly. So he performed under the name Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown, which by itself kind of already sounds creepy to me. He's a serial killer and a sexual offender. He murdered at least 33 known young men and boys and buried most of them at least under his house. Which, I mean, says for itself. Okay. Now that the recap is done, I'm going to move on to like the details of the story. So we can start off with his childhood. He grew up in a really abusive home, and he struggled with his sexuality growing up. His dad was an alcoholic, and he would beat him and his siblings when he thought they like misbehaved, or whatever his definition of misbehaving was. And the worst part is he beat them with a razor strap. So questionable. The abuse was so persistent to them that they actually just learned to like, I guess, not feel it anymore. And it came to a point where they would be abused with this razor strap so often and so hard that they just like wouldn't feel it, they wouldn't cry, and they would just take it. The alcoholic father was also abusive to his wife, so John's mother as well, which makes everything like 100 times worse. He also had a really tough school life growing up. He wasn't able to socialize with the children like other children were able to do because he had a congenital heart condition, and his dad saw that as like yet another failure. That was like his early school life. As he got older, he worked as a fast food chain manager during like the 60s, and he actually kind of thrived. Like he was doing well, he was making money, and he became after you know, getting all that money and doing really well in that business, he became a self-made contractor, which paid really, really well back in the 60s. I'm sure it does now. I'm not too sure, but like I'm pretty sure it still does. And so yeah, he was making some coin. He was also a Democratic precinct captain in the 70s. That's pretty impressive. He, believe it or not, was actually a very well-liked man in his community, and needless to say, nobody really suspected him. He was married and divorced twice with 2 biological children and 2 stepchildren. Okay, this is the part where it gets really interesting because this is kind of where it goes into his like clown disguise, I guess. He was a member of the Chicago area Jolly Joker Clown Club, and he frequently performed in like clown attire. He would dress up for like the children and just perform a bunch of like clown acts as a clown would. I'm sorry, I need to like make sure this is even. I believe so. Okay. Performed in clown attire and like clown makeup at children's parties, charity fundraisers, and other events just of that nature. And he lured his victims in with the promise of like construction work or some other like ruse. Because he was well liked in the community, he was so trusted, and when he said that, you know, he would promise them construction work or whatever, they would believe him and follow him. And at that point, once he was able to capture them and make sure they weren't able to escape, he would sexually assault them, torture them, and then eventually kill them. And his method of murder was strangling with a rope, or sometimes even his hands. I don't really know how people can strangle other people with their bare hands. Like, imagine the amount of force that takes. Anyway, in 1968, he was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 teen boys, and he was given a 10-year sentence for that. Also, I am gonna go do my eyeliner off camera because I can't talk and do eyeliner, and I don't want it to just be like silence and me doing my eyeliner. So I will be back. I went ahead and like put on some sunscreen and some moisturizer, but I'm gonna prime on camera. So in 1968, he was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 teen boys and was given a 10-year prison sentence, which in my opinion is like nothing. Like, he sexually assaulted not 1 but 2 minors. Anyways, he went to prison for 10 years. He was released on parole in the summer of 1970, which means he literally only served a 2-year sentence. But then he was arrested again, but only because he was accused of sexually assaulting another teen. The only reason the charges for that trial were dropped were because the teen didn't show up to the trial. I'm not exactly sure why, but I can assume it was out of fear. I mean, it's quite understandable. That's when the charges were dropped. By like the mid 1970s, 2 more young males accused him of rape. So like, this guy just is not stopping. He was questioned. At this point, I guess the police started taking it seriously because like so many people were coming to them about it. And the police decided to question him about the disappearance of like other young men in the area. And like later on, Gacy kind of referred to this period of his life as like the cruising years, where he committed most of his murders. A lot of them weren't caught until later. Fast forward, on December 11th, 1978, a 15-year-old boy named Robert went missing, and it was reported to the police that the boy was last seen by his mother at a drugstore where he worked before he headed out to meet Gacy for a construction job. Like I mentioned earlier, he would promise his victims like construction jobs or other things. So yeah, that's why he left. And then 10 days later, the police searched Gacy's house, and they uncovered evidence of his involvement in so many different crimes, obviously including murder. And then it was later discovered that he had committed his first like known killing in 1972. So about 2 years after he had gotten released on parole for serving that 2-year sentence. 1972 was when he killed a 16-year-old boy named Timothy McCoy after, of course, luring him to his home. After a lengthy period of police surveillance and investigation, and lots of trenches filled with like human remains in like the crawl space beneath his house, he confessed at that point because I guess he knew he got caught or whatever. He confessed actually to killing 30 people. A lot of these victims the police didn't even know about, but I'm sure they were reported as like missing people. At this point, after he had confessed to killing all these people, all 30 people, the police decided to look through his house because they did find remains the first time, and I guess they were optimistic about finding more evidence to support their claims and his confession. So when they looked at his house and like beneath his house, like in the crawl space and everything, they discovered a bunch of human remains, and I'm not exactly sure how many they discovered, but they discovered a lot. Unfortunately, at that point, 8 of the bodies would remain unidentified because of, I'm assuming, the decomposition and also the fact that like he tortured them, so like they didn't exactly look like their normal selves. The good thing is that more recently, the county that was in charge of like investigating this specific man and his murders identified the victims. I want to say this was back in 2017. One of the men that they call victim number 24 was identified as 16-year-old James Byron Hackinson. These are all very, very young. It was just an awful, awful thing. So this little boy was murdered in 1976. He left his home and traveled to Chicago to begin his new life in the city. He was very excited. His mother knew and everything. He lived with his mother back at home. And on August 5th, he called his mom to let him know that he had like safely arrived in Chicago, just because she wanted to make sure he was okay and everything. But then the police believe that he was like murdered shortly after, just because his mom never really received any correspondence, like any calls, texts, anything that can match up with the fact that he was alive at that time or after that. So police did say that they believe he was killed just shortly after. Unfortunately, Hackensen's mother died in the early 2000s, so she wasn't there when they identified the body. So I guess she died not really knowing exactly what happened to her son, which is an awful thing. The authorities made an immediate match to victim number 24, which was this boy, after matching some DNA samples with like other family members. Now we're gonna get into his trial. Okay, so his trial started on February 6th, 1980. Since he had confessed to like all the crimes, the arguments were focused on whether he could be just declared insane or if he was just like held completely responsible for his actions. And if he was held insane, he would be remitted to a state mental facility instead of like a prison. But he told the police that the murders had been committed by an alternate personality. So of course they were looking into his mental state and if he had any psychological disorders or anything of that sort. So of course at the trial they had medical professionals, so of course like psychiatrists, who would testify on both sides if he was in his right state of mind and if he would have to be remitted to a state mental facility. After like a short jury deliberation, he was obviously found guilty of committing 33 murders in total, and he became known as one of like the most ruthless serial killers in US history. He was sentenced to serve, wait for this, 12 death sentences and 21 natural life sentences. So this guy was not getting out of prison. At this point, he was obviously, okay, let me just adjust, okay. He was serving his life sentence in prison, but also he was on death row, you know? So, and because of the severity of his crimes, they wanted to execute him as soon as possible. They did whatever they could to make it happen. Once again, because of the nature of his crimes and because he was just so violent and almost inhumane, that they wanted to speed up the process of his execution. And I guess at this point, back in the 60s, psychological and psychiatric disorders weren't really looked at as serious. And of course, I am not at all condoning anything that he did. I do not support it 110%. I don't think anybody would. I just feel, after reading about his story and everything, I feel like they didn't evaluate him properly, I want to say, or even fairly, just because of everything he did. I guess people kind of question whether it was fair, and that goes into the topic of death row and everything, because I know a lot of people are against the death penalty and everything. I'm not going to state my opinions on that just because that's going to get a little out of hand, but what do you guys think? Do you guys think he deserved to die? Do you guys think he should have served the rest of his life in prison? Do you think he should have been remitted to a psychiatric facility? They called it a state mental facility, which is what I referred to it as like the whole video. I'm not exactly sure if there's a difference between a state mental facility and a psychiatric facility, but I'm just going to call it a psychiatric facility because a state mental facility just sounds kind of disrespectful, in my opinion. Look at how flawless Concealer looks. Yes, please. I just distracted myself. What was I talking about? Yes, his execution. Okay, so he had a hard life in prison, as anybody would, because of the nature of his crimes. Obviously, he didn't have friends and didn't have many friends, at least in prison. So I guess that kind of reminded him about his school life, because he didn't have any friends. Like, he wasn't able to talk to people. So of course, if you're not able to talk to somebody, like, you wouldn't really be making any friends. And he got used to that at a young age, not talking to anybody. So growing up, it was very, very, very hard for him to socialize. But yeah, he was imprisoned at the Menard, I think, Correctional Center in Illinois for about a decade and a half, so 15 years. And he was appealing the sentence and offering contradictory statements to the murders in interviews. So, like, obviously, because he was such a notorious serial killer, everybody, all these reporters and everything, wanted an interview with this man. They wanted to see his perspective on everything. They wanted to hear from him himself. And believe it or not, even though he had confessed to all of these murders, he kept denying being guilty later on during the interviews. Of course, nobody believed it because he did confess not only to 1 or 2 murders, he confessed to like 30 or more. Like, moving forward, he had a 900 telephone number set up with like a 12-minute recorded statement declaring his innocence and just talking about how even though he confessed, like, he didn't do it. And I guess at that time also nobody believed him because first of all, he confessed, and he also had a history of being accused of sexual assault. So when they found out that these people were sexually assaulted upon being killed, you put 2 and 2 together. Like, nobody believed the story. I don't really think, maybe his family did, I'm not too sure about his family, but nobody believed the story. Okay, so I just went ahead and did my makeup off camera because like the story was coming to an end and this wasn't really just a makeup video and I wanted to make it kind of like inclusive. So yeah, like I'm done my makeup, and because I'm going to like a henna party, I'm getting dressed in like all traditional clothing, style my hair a little bit. So I guess you're gonna see me getting ready now. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you staying until the end of the video. This definitely is a new type of video I wasn't planning on doing, but I did see somebody else do it and I definitely want to recreate it. But if you like this, definitely comment and let me know. Show some love. Turn on my post notifications and definitely subscribe.